Welcome to the first ever, as far as I know, broadcast and virtual panel discussion with Tangen Draw. Today we're going to be talking about maybe a recap of Kiss the Ground, and hopefully everybody got a chance to watch that documentary. We're going to have a panel discussion with Tim Conver, Nick Conver, and Morgan Conver, and I will act as your MC. And we'll briefly go over an agenda. And we'd like to keep this an open discussion. So as people have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat to this meeting. And I'm going to ask Mo to keep us honest about those questions. So if any of us in the panel discussion or I, the MC, miss those questions, then by all means, Mo will jump in and point out the question that might be asked. And Mo, I just got a text from Stephanie, if you could forward on the invite to her so she can join. So we'll start with introductions and we'll ask the panel members to kind of go over their general impressions or something that was poignant about Kiss the Ground. And then we'll turn the time to Nick to kind of talk about the big picture and the vision, and then, sorry, to Tim, and then to Nick to talk about kind of the boots on the ground, lessons learned, and how we apply the concepts of Kiss the Ground, and then over to Morgan to talk more about the nutrition and greenwashing and some other points that were somewhat covered in Kiss the Ground. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim Conver, visionary, and if you can start with your thoughts on Kiss the Ground and take it from there.
Okay, well, I'll back off the visionary title if it's okay. But I thought with the Kiss the Ground movies, the first thing I took away from it was the first technical resource that they introduced, which was Ray Archuleta, and he focused on regenerative agriculture management, and then later regenerative cattle grazing, with and introduced the complex natural connections starting with the soil. I think he introduced that as if we get the soil right, we can solve a lot of and I think that was civilization's problems, because healthy soil leads to healthy plants, which leads to healthy animals, to healthy people, to healthy water, and a healthy climate. He then later went into comments about with the introduction of the plow and agriculture using plows historically, that led to erosion and desertification that collapsed empires throughout history. And then I think a third point he made later on in the film was with the introduction of modern agricultural chemicals about 50 years ago. Since that time, global topsoil has eroded / disappeared to the tune of about 1/3 of the total available on a global basis. So that set the tone for what the film was identifying as the problem and the cause of the problem, and the solution being regenerative agriculture. So that was kind of a long, shaggy reflection on the primary takeaway I had.
So I have a question. the first time you saw this documentary, I assume that you and the Conver family was already neck deep in this kind of thinking. And so was it an aha, I agree, or were there a lot of new thoughts that were kind of realized at that point upon first viewing, which I assume was a handful of years ago?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, Mike. I think is to the extent I have any accurate recollection of that, I think it was pretty much that they had done a great job of communicating the extraordinarily complex connections that nature has that were used ultimately to terraform the earth and build that healthy, complex, healthy chain. So I don't think there was a lot of different or new information for us because we started down the rabbit hole and had been spending quite a bit of time discovering that it's not a rabbit hole, it's a rabbit warren, and everything in nature is connected to everything else.
So can you talk about how, the due diligence that the Conver family did in kind of the earlier years of Tangen Draw and Compass Cattle, how you guys came about developing what is now known as the strategic intent, and perhaps you share maybe what that strategic intent is for those on the call that don't know of it or are not familiar with it.
Well, I think I should start with the way we introduced ourselves to the agricultural community here in Sweetgrass County, where we ultimately put together the land piece of our intent. And that was that our single big advantage in this endeavor was we don't have any bad habits that we have to break because we're starting from scratch. So it started as I think an intent to produce the most nutritious and best tasting meat. And then pulling the string from there, where the historic sources of those bests were, which led us to grass finishing versus feedlot finishing. And from there, you go down a rabbit hole. And once we were down the rabbit hole, there's a sliding glass door from grass finish to regenerative agriculture and regenerative grazing. And once in there, you find these infinite connections in nature that Archuleta describes succinctly in that movie. So that was the initial transition that led to starting to read books, starting to deal with consultants that were neck deep in this area for decades. And I think we have that probably turned into a library of a couple dozen resource books and half that many expert resources that ultimately led to a phenomenal team that actually operates the ranch and is committed to continuously improving all of those processes from the grazing to the soil, back to the plants and up the chain. So that chain of health and nutrition, I think follows, as Archuleta described, from the soil to people. But at the plant, my current view is it branches out and it goes to the animals and people on one branch. It goes to the ecology, the ecosystem, and the larger environment on another branch. One thing that he also made a point of in that film was that when he's talking about global warming and carbon, that the only technology that addresses the excess carbon in the atmosphere is regenerative grazing. All others might reduce additional carbon, but none of them pull it out.
Well, and you mentioned the team in your comments, and I wanted to just this was not on the agenda, but I do want to give the opportunity to the team to unmute yourselves, Chad, on the Compass office, and just say hello to everybody on the call. So while they're unmuting themselves, I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide, and Nick, you'll be up. So say hello, Chad, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, got it. Chad Curry here, and we have the whole team. We have Scott McLeod and Emma Donald and Bobby Selke. So we're all sitting here listening intently with our camera off.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And Nick, if you want to maybe talk about how the strategic intent and all of the background of the Conver family leading up to this point operationally takes effect.
Yeah, do you want me to start with the kiss the ground stuff or no?
Sure. Yeah. Sounds great.
I watched that last night, and I'd watched it the first time I was actually at that Soils conference with Gabe Brown, and they put it on because it just came out that day. And he's one of the farmers, ranchers in the movie. And I forgot, I was thinking it was the second one that was more kind of ranch related that they did. Can't remember what it was called, something on the ground. But I enjoyed watching it again, and I thought it was sort of interesting because it's a lot more focused on the big picture, where the second movie was kind of ranch related more, and this was kind of the implications of regenerative in any field, like the kind of tree farm and everything else they're doing, and more focused on the kind of entire global warming effect of it, where we kind of implement the same things, but on a much different scale on our ranch, but they're all based off, what they use as soil principles. So we're doing the exact same thing on our ranch, that we're not really thinking about global warming and everything else. We're trying to get the best product and the best kind of soil and health that we can get for our ranch and our meat, but it's the exact same thing that creates, when Alan Savory talks about desertification and it causing all these worldwide problems, they're really only dealing with the soil principles that they use. They're kind of minimal disturbance, armor on the soil, diversity, living roots, and using livestock, which is pretty much the exact way we try to run our ranch. I think Alan Savory was in there too, and he had a TED Talk. And it's one of the first things I had watched when I got into learning about regen. And the first time I was like, oh, wow, it's the more you think about it, the more like monster effects they have. But for us, it's more on a small scale, but they're in every place. It's a different situation, but it's the same principle. So the context is different and how you implement it is different, but the principles are all kind of exactly the same that helps our ranch that they're mostly talking about in that movie.
Well, I want to invite everybody on the call. If you have a question, by all means, feel free to raise your hand or put that question directly in the chat. You talked about scale, Nick. Like, what's the difference between the scale of what Tangen Draw and Compass Cattle are doing versus, say, someone like Alan Savory or Gabe Brown? Can you compare kind of the operational differences to the best of your knowledge?
I think Gabe Brown, I don't know how big his ranch is, but it's very similar to what we're doing. I mean, he works on all these big things, but his ranch is very similar. I think he's integrated from cow calf all the way to finished animal. And I think he has a little bit of a different context in who he sells to and what he's producing, but he's doing pretty much exactly what we're doing. I think Alan Savory, he kind of, when those guys were all starting, he split off and does more kind of full world countries, like advising countries on how to stop desertification and get grasslands back and change the climate, where Gabe's more focused on helping ranchers lower their costs, stop their inputs, and get more nutritious meat kind of through regenerative ranching.
Was there ever a time when, you know, the Conver family thought about doing crops for food and kind of integrating the animal grazing as well as crop production? And if so, why did they not choose to do that?
We don't. I mean, our focus has been on creating beef and bison so far. So we don't have like cash crops that we use. But probably the best thing for regenerative ranching is perennial grasses, because we don't, like, on a lot of those things they talk about tilling, and when you have a cash crop, say you're growing corn, you're kind of producing it, you're killing it, and then they end up having just dirt for months at a time that they end up having to till and redo. So we're not really in that situation where we're growing grass and still using the same principles, but we always have a living root in there. There's times where we're switching over what's in a crop that we use kind of cover crops and plant multiple things, but they're all grass species or forbs and legumes and grasses. So he grows cash crops we don't do that. But it's the same. The benefit is we never till, we never, we don't have open bare ground ever. And so one of our things is just maximizing the diversity and the amount of grass that we have. But the upside is we get to have a living root kind of always growing in there.
And I want to ask you kind of an operational or ranching question, and help us define some terms, because there's terms that a lot of people might not be familiar with. For example, you use the term cow calf. No, there's also the term stockers, and there's also the term, a finishing herd. Can you talk about how Tangen is different? For example, how, we're not bringing in stockers as part of the Tangen Draw finished product.
Yeah, it's one thing that there's not many ranches that kind of do that in a region. I'm sure there are some, but a lot of them kind of focus on one area. What we've decided to do was try to control as much of that process as we can. So, ranches could be just cow calf, where you have a cow, they calf, you sell that calf to the market, or they can have stockers that you buy after they're weaned to, like, for a year, and you just put on weight. Or you can have finishers where you just buy that animal after it's a year and a half and you finish it on the grass. And all of those can be regenerative. You can still graze however you want with them. Ours gets more complex because we want to be able to control the genetics and that animal the entire time and have consistency. But it also adds complexity to the regenerative ranching side, because we're trying to maximize and graze a certain way, but we have, multiple animals in multiple herds that have different requirements at different times of the years in the cow, cattle, and the bison side. So it adds a lot of work for the guys doing the actual grazing, because one, we want to be trying to maximize the kind of weighing the benefit to the soil, but we also have to weigh what the animal needs at that time and what kind of class it is. So the upside of where what we get to do is also experiment a lot. So you kind of, people get stuck in paradigms. Like it's always, people say when, I think they talked about in the movie is a problem to getting people to switch is they've done this their whole lives and they're used to some way, and getting them to switch their paradigm is hard. And it seems like it's also like that with people in regenerative ranching, because there's, if you talk to experts, they all have different ideas, and you've kind of done something that works. But there's a lot of different theories, even in regenerative ranching, on how to graze. And one thing we get to do is experiment with a lot of those and try to collect data and figure out how to correlate that to see what really worked and what didn't, is one of our goals, and something that's different than a lot of ranches.
And can you talk about?
Let me say that the experimentation piece that Nick brought up is, I think, has been essential for us in our journey to date and in the foreseeable future, because we're focused on first producing the best tasting, most nutritious, and textured meat using low stress management and regenerative management techniques. So we are constantly questioning how to implement those techniques in order to achieve that consistent best taste, nutrition, and texture. And that leads through all those complex connections to everything Nick was describing there as innovation, which requires innovative people on the ground observing and checking and moving forward on different options.
Well, I want to jump ahead and put Morgan on the spot just a little bit to talk about how we are able to, what are the differences in processing once the animal is finished and goes to the processor? What are the differences in what we do so that we can actually track, we can try a piece of a cut of meat and track where that animal came from, and how do we organize that?
Yes, I'd say we probably go to the other extreme on that, as well as things that Nick and my dad have already been talking about. But we have ear tags, like everybody else. There's an ear tag on every cattle. But when we send them to the processor, then it's tracked through their whole process for their production. And everything is one cow for cuts. So they break down one beef and wait until they can break down the next one, because we have it each labeled. So anytime our customers get that product, you can see what number that cattle was, and then we can track it back. So for us, that's for nutrient analysis, that's for quality control if we're tasting one cut from every animal, and can kind of standardize from there. The other process that's very different is when it comes to ground beef, is that we still on that do it by one animal, and that everything is dry aged to the ground, to the main cuts, everything, organ meats. But that is pretty unusual, because they usually just take the whole lot at the end. Or if you're talking about mass commodities, then that could be thousands of animals that are put into what 1 pound of ground meat you got from the grocery store, where ours are each from one animal.
Thank you. And I want to switch kind of to the Morgan end of things. And for those that might not know, Nick is on the Compass cattle side of things, where they take the animal to a finished product, and then the best animals are selected by both Compass cattle and Tangen Draw, and only the best are then sent to the processor. And so naturally, switching from the Nick and operational and Compass side to Morgan to the Tangen side and more consumer facing side, what were your impressions on Kiss the Ground? What were the things that stood out to you, and and maybe what are some lessons that we can all learn from further discussion?
Yes. And just a quick note on the finishing of that last one, another, not necessarily per animal difference, but with Compass brings in the animals to the processor and they're walking the animals through the chute for our quality control for the low stress handling portion. And then when it comes time for fabrication, myself or Steph in operations, who's also on here, and somebody else from the team is there with quality control for fabrication. So another level of how much we're in there. This is how we want it cut. This is how we want it presented. This needs to go back, or making decisions on the fly if the brisket was finished enough or not, and how we use it. So just a side note. I think for the film, it's just such a blessing of Hollywood taking able to distill it, as Dad said, a huge complex thing, and it's very difficult. We get lost in the weeds every time we try to tell people, and you see the eyes glaze over, but we're so excited we keep talking that we haven't figured out exactly how to break that down. And so to see it in the film where it's a lot more imagery and the science, and so it may be just top level in the start of the conversation, it's great that they found a way to open the door to that conversation and bring that to so many more people that didn't know anything about it, and make it digestible. So I think that's the best part. Even I think it's a starting point of the conversation. The next movie that Nick was referring to is Uncommon Ground, that maybe we'll do another topic on some point that would be neat. I think that for where I come in on the Tangen side is marketing. As you see here, they bring up greenwash in it, or the topics, the ideas of food as medicine. And those are passionate pieces for us, and the reason why we go to such an extent of the detail and the data collection, and we don't release anything until we have data to back it up, to be so sure that we're not part of the greenwash. And we still will probably find out we are in some way, because you're learning more information every day. So we do our best to stay out of that and just speak to what we're doing and what we're finding. And I have to tell you, I'm short on breath. I have a 9-month baby in here that pushes, I can't breathe while I talk. I feel terrible talking.
We're just glad that you're not delivering the baby right now.
I always feel like, but anyhow, so if I keep going, greenwash for us is two things that I would want to hit on. Just in general, for the biggest example is to put it into perspective as grass-fed. If someone's saying grass-fed versus grass-fed, grass-finished, in the marketing world, they'll just say that because if as a consumer you don't know the difference, then you hear grass-fed and you think, great, it's not conventional beef, or it's not at a feed lot. And they put a picture with it that on the image is a cow on grass. So it just paints this whole picture, and it's more romantic. But if you look or you think about it, then anything that's grass-fed, it can be finished on anything. They could be finishing on carrots. They can be finishing it at a feedlot on oats, on barley, on corn, or it could be grass-finished as well. So that's another reason of needing to know your farmer and your rancher. But it's a huge one, but it's in every industry possible. That's marketers' job, is to get consumers to buy the product. So we are particular on the grass-fed, grass-finished, never seeing grain in that sense. And then with that, and they do talk about that in the end of the movie, that everybody needs to know their rancher, buy grass-fed. Do I think they were trying to manipulate? No, but I just think that that's such a controversial topic that I bring it up. And then I believe in food as medicine, and the more that we eat, the whole products, the more is bioavailable to our bodies and what you take in. So there's the push for all high protein and everything, and there's, it's It's tough. They want us to get 100 to 130 grams of protein a day. How do you do that? And so we're working on like, what's the breakdown? What does that actually look like? It's doable. Like Clay, who's on this call, eats a pound of ground meat in the morning for breakfast, probably. And Mike Stowe's, it's just like that right there is 25 grams of protein per 4 ounces. So it is not that hard to do, but the idea of it is challenging. Breathe. I can't. But what I do want to share is when you talk about food as medicine and when we talk about conventional versus regenerative, as everything Nick spoke about and what the movie talks about. And in that movie, he shows on one side is a bare ground, brown field, his is growing, or is it South Africa where he transformed the desert into the green grasses? That literally translate into nutrients. So the better we can make the soils alive, one, that's what provides the nutrients to the animals, as Dad said, the whole health of. And so the nutrients are in the plant now, the animals eating those plants, and then those plants are now translated, into the animal and to us. If I give so back to us collecting data, we send our meat into a company called Audacious, and they test all of a collection of our meats, not every single one. Back to, I can't lie. I can't lead you astray. But if we say protein, so our beef versus USDA, it's close enough, but we are a rich source versus USDA being not getting into the rich source status, but we're just barely under 25 grams, and USDA, you're getting closer to 22 grams. Fats, we're at 4.5 grams. This is all per 4 ounces. And with USDA meat, so conventionally raised, 11.89. Cholesterol is 57 grams versus 67 grams. Saturated fat, 1.3 versus 4.75. Let's see what's other. Monounsaturated lower, polyunsaturated lower. Trans fatty acids, 0.07 versus 0.48. Let's keep going. Omega-3s, this is the big topic of grass finished. In conventional agriculture, your range is 13 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. And the difference of omega-6 is more of an inflammatory omega fatty acid versus omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Your staple one is salmon, which is typically a 1-to-1. Other benchmark beef in the grass finished world average is more of a 9.9 to 1, and we are anywhere from 1.5 to 2.0 to 1 in our 3 years of collecting this data. So that's amazing. And so this just all tells us the story and backs the Kool-Aid the Conver family has been drinking, and why we wouldn't be willing to share any of this prior to having this data. I wouldn't even put that grass finish is known to have better omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Grass finish is known to have X, Y, or Z. We just stayed away from the conversation until we could say our beef is this. And that's really exciting and something I'm proud of.
So Morgan, I've got to ask you, so a few things you've shared already, the grass-fed versus grass-fed, grass-finished. I'll share with the people on the call that we are working with, a search engine optimization and an online company to help us optimize getting the message out. And we are learning from them and their expertise that hardly anybody Google searches grass-fed, grass-finished. But the numbers for searching grass-fed are incredibly high. So while we sit on a hill and preach grass-fed, grass-finished, it's proven that not very many people think about that. So if anybody on this call wants to be the real belle of the ball at a cocktail party, you can share that with people that you're talking to and say, actually, grass-fed doesn't mean anything, but grass-fed, grass-finished is kind of where it's at. So back to my question for Morgan, how do you share this kind of information without people's eyes glazing over? How is it that people can talk about these things in a setting, and like, what's the best way to get this message out?
Well, if I knew that answer, everybody would know about us and would be pounding. I think it is, for us, it's been a very organic growth, word of mouth as the kind of building the evangelist, and that takes time of really trying the product, engaging in the conversation, learning, and truly finding out the why for themselves of what that difference is. So I'd love to hear from people here if they want to add to the chat of what is important to them. It's going to be very different than what's important to us. We're just here. I think we've made it our goal in Tangen, and this is a prime example of bringing this conversation to the table about education, empowering, and engaging so that you can make better choices for you, whatever that better choice is. And that can be a 10% shift, a 1% shift. But if we can provide that information and be a source that people can come to and trust, I think that's how we get into more hands. And it's not that we're not just a beef company. There's a much broader, bigger goal here, as well as wanting, just that's the passion, is to bring that information. I would say we each have our own why and passion. That's one of mine.
Well, and I'll mention that at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that this is the first ever, at least, digitally broadcast discussion. And the people that were invited were Rangeland Society members. And we'd like to claim that 2026 is going to be the year of the Rangeland Society. We do have initiatives in place to add value to your membership beyond a meat subscription and boxes that show up in your door. And I'll make an announcement at the end that I am particularly excited about. So I would say that we want to engage with our customers in meaningful conversation to help spread the message and the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. Morgan, are you willing to share what additional products are imminently coming out in the near future and the things that we'll be working on developing in the near future for 2026?
Yes, this is very exciting for us. Many of you probably got a sample maybe a year ago of our first go at jerky, and we started this process probably 2 years ago. And we just finally, through 3 nutrient analysis testings, settled on our final ingredient list, I suppose, and cooking instructions. And so we're now in the process to send that through USDA and get the approval for our first product, or our jerky launch. Not our first. We had a ad hoc one very early on, and then we learned a lot more. And quickly on that, another greenwash, and an example of we learn as we go, as well as we first started. And the idea of nitrates was not good for us, but you use celery salt instead and cherry powder. And that is the more natural sense to preserve it. And in that, we learned Steph found at a conference, a new company called Prosier that uses another product of citric acid, and we'll learn further there of how we can keep on being cleaner. But that's the next step of what we learned, is that celery salt acts in your body as nitrates do. And I believe, and Dad can add to it, I think that that process is they inundate celery with nitrates, and it has so much in it that it can then be a nitrate source without calling it nitrates. But he knows the science behind that a bit more. So anyhow, this is the next version of the cleanest jerky we could possibly make. And we've gone through additions to make it the lower sodium, low fat, high protein, low sugar. And we'll have a naked version that is really the flavor of the meat and no garlic in it for people with sensitivities. And then we have our original that's a little closer to, it has more pepper in it, I'd say, and then a hot honey. So there we do have additional sugars in that one, but they're still pretty low. And that one will have a spice and the sweetness. So we're super excited for that. And I'm super proud of my team for sticking with it and getting this product out there, even though we're still have a little bit more before the finish line. And then the next one is that we're creating the cleanest version of a hot dog that we can, so we can all feel good about enjoying those all summer long. And that's using that same product. And so we're just in that phase right now, doing side by sides for the final tweaks, and that nutrient analysis come back really well as too. So we look forward to sharing those with you this next couple of months.
Awesome. I'd like to, sorry, did I hear you, Tim, say
Nope.
something? Okay. I'm going to advance the slide to the last slide, but it kind of indicates that we're all at the end. So actually, for the sake of having open conversation, I'm going to end the slideshow that we can just look at each other's faces and ask if anybody has any questions or what impressed you about the documentary, or what you would ask the panel from your viewing.
You guys there?
You got it, Mortello.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr.
I'd like-
Stoves.
How are you guys? I actually watched the documentary twice the other night, and then I woke up this morning at like 5 a.m. and watched it again without children jumping on me. And I found it interesting what I took away from it the first time, and then what I took away from it the second time on a second pass through. The first time, it was kind of reconfirming all the things that Tim told me at the dinner table, talking about dung beetles and the whole circle of that. And it was interesting to just have a very small base of information going into the first time watching. And then the second time was more from an application, perspective. Like, okay, I live in very metropolitan Kirkland, Washington. How does this apply to me, and how can I apply it outside of being a Rangeland member? Like, what else can I do? How else can I intake? What else can I provide to my kids? And you look at it like from the produce side of it, that's very hard to source, living in Kirkland and not having a connection like I have for my protein, right? So it just kind of opened up a question in my head of like, okay, so if I wanted to completely consume regenerative product, right? Protein, vegetables, where do those other sources come from? And how would I find them to know that they're truly what they're saying they are? So I found it really interesting to think about what's next in my life that I can either add or, change out, like produce, right? Like they say organic. Well, okay, at the grocery store, but like you said, Morgan, meeting the ranchers, going like physically being on the land that they're growing, like we have the opportunity to do here with Tangen Draw, it's kind of daunting when you try and add another aspect, into your diet, if you will, or how you're consuming. So the question I had, though, if you guys know from the political side, remind me when that documentary was filmed.
I think it was 2000.
Yeah. So has there been any advancements?
2020, I think.
I mean, that's what I meant. Sorry.
2000. Has there been any advancements or anything from, they talked a little bit about the political side and how ranches are being supported, and the regenerative side wasn't really, there wasn't a financial benefit to the ranchers and farmers. Has the tune changed at all around the country and in our government to support this a little bit more?
I'm going to just add before Mike answers that some of those things, like that's part of this, is the more we learn, the more exhausting and challenging it is, because you want to make all these changes. and then you want the vegetables from it or anything. And then that, like you said, the challenge of it being at the resources are limited. There are CSAs are different things that do ship boxes that you can find. I believe
What are CSAs?
community. I'm not quite sure what it stands for. I'd have to
Okay.
look that up. But that would be a source of trying to find, and I know around Washington there will be plenty that they of outside of Kirkland that probably do deliveries in and could be a start. But I think that's one of the challenges of getting people engaged is that it's like when someone tells you to use clean products at home and then all of a sudden you're having to change every skincare product, candle, pots, pans, spatulas, storage containers. I mean, there's not a thing in the house that doesn't fall under what could be killing us. So then all of a sudden you just throw your hands up. So it's back to that, making that 10% shift of what can I do today? And so maybe for you, it's that the vegetables and keeping on the food is medicine. And how do you get the most nutrients that you can? And that quick example that we've used before with another study of a nonprofit is that it really does matter of that nutrient density of you can have one carrot versus a whole handful to get that same amount depending on how they grew it.
Yeah.
So I think Mike has the information of how it's changed though.
One thing on the on how do you get this information out, or one of the biggest questions I get at the firehouse when I'm bringing steaks and they know what I'm putting out to unthaw every single shift. They ask me the nutrients of what I'm eating, and having that available to be able to compare with the guy who brings in the steak from Safeway and then compared to mine, like being able to see the numbers, I think would reach people it would be the most clear. So for like guys like me, Clay, who are really conscious about getting in our protein intake, that's the first thing they're going for is fats and protein, and to be able to like physically see that on a chart would be very helpful.
I'll put that together and we'll send it out to you, to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to send out to Rangeland Society members, just a comparison, because we have that data. I'll do my best, Mike, to answer the first part of your question. That is, what has changed since the movie? And I'll give the credit to Morgan because she actually sent this to me a couple or few days ago of just some of the major policy developments since the movie has come out. And that is, there's an additional $20 billion for climate smart agriculture, expanded fundings for programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, Regional Conservation Partnership Program. So these are, I believe they're federally administered programs that are trying to encourage regenerative agriculture. There's additional climate smart commodities programs just between 2022 and 2023, where the Department of Agriculture provides over $3 billion to test and scale regenerative and climate-friendly practices. There's state-level programs that have come into play. Specifically, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Colorado have state soil health initiatives. And the regenerative agriculture language in the Farm Bill debate. So from 2023 to 2026, there are upcoming soil carbon incentives, regenerative grazing incentives, and climate smart agriculture metrics, as well as the corporate world. We've seen General Mills, we've seen Nestle. A lot of bigger companies are paying attention to the market that is being created based on regenerative agriculture. And I'll share something that I read. We did reach out to Josh Tickell. He's the producer of this film. Unfortunately, he didn't get back to us. Turns out he's probably busier than we gave him credit for. But I did read something that he published, and he talked about how there's a big feeling that Hollywood is kind of dying, the Hollywood of the glory days, and how the consumer isn't only interested in being entertained. But he mentioned how when he moved to Southern California, a lot of people were really reluctant to help fund this film because they didn't think there was a market for it. And since then, it's been the recipient of several awards, and it's had staying power. And here we are talking about it 6 years later. as just a primer to have intelligent conversation. So his comment was that people care about these things, and they care about trying to figure it out as well, maybe more than they care about like an entertaining, Marvel show that they saw 5 years ago. So I do believe that the movie itself has been an instigator of change, and we're here alongside with it, trying to instigate change. So excellent question, but I want to make sure we answered your question perfectly.
Yep.
There's a lot of
Anything
money
else?
in programs that do carbon sequestration, so you can buy carbon credits. Seems like there's a lot more in the last 3 years. So a lot of like a handful of ranches next to us are doing that, where they sign up and companies pay them, and they get carbon credits if they follow certain rules and there's certain testing and stuff like that. But
Katie,
that seems like
I missed you before when your hand was up. I see you're typing. Do you want to ask your question?
Oh, I was just going to comment to Mike. I'm Katie. I'm new at Tangen in Compass. I'm originally from Northern California, and one of our organic producers called Farm Fresh to You that I used to work with, they, I believe, do doorstep deliveries and ship. So, I mean, I would say like everything is like farmers markets, I think, are your best resource if you can't find like a reputable organic producer for your produce.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
What was that? What was it? What was the name of that?
Farm Fresh to You.
Perfect.
And they're out of Yolo County in Northern California.
Cool. Thank you.
So yeah, no problem.
Well, and I want to make an announcement that doesn't have to be at the very end, but it also kind of answers your question, Mike, about like, where do you find these quality sources? And we are going to start a book club, and I'm not going to yet announce what book it's going to be, but similar to this discussion, rather than watching a documentary and then having a discussion, we're going to read a book. We're going to give you a little more time, to read the book than we gave you to watch the movie. And I'm excited to announce that we have been in conversations with the author, and the author of the book will be joining us in the discussion. So look for more information coming very soon. But we're going to have a book club for Rangeland Society members, and then have a panel discussion with the author. And I believe that this author is going to also have a good answer for you, Mike. So I'd say keep that question in the back of your pocket if you don't solve it between now and then. Any other questions from anybody on the call?
I feel like Kitty was going to come in with one, but she's been quiet. She's like, I'm not even on the call.
She's scrambling. She's scrambling for her unmute button. Kitty, you have a question, a hardball question for us?
Nope.
I am here. I really don't. This has motivated me to watch the film again, because I think what Mike said, now I have a baseline and I'll get even more out of it. But I actually been sharing it with other friends because it's extremely interesting. But no questions, sorry.
Great introduction. Nope, not at all.
Well, we really appreciate everybody's time. We know that time is a precious commodity, and hopefully this was beneficial, and we're excited to roll out more initiatives to add value to Rangeland Society members. We appreciate you so much. If there are no other questions, we'll give you back 5 minutes to your day and say thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.